Welcome to literary and jury charge practice. Let's start out with a short jury charge warm-up. Get our fingers moving. Ready? Here we go. Jurors, I'm going to just complete my instructions with a few relatively brief remarks. I've outlined for you the rules of law applicable to your consideration of the death penalty and the process by which you should determine the facts and weigh the evidence. And in a few moments, you'll retire to the jury room. The importance of your deliberations should be obvious. I remind you that you can return a decision sentencing Mr. Sarnev to death only if all 12 of you are unanimously persuaded that the death penalty is in fact appropriate. And again, I remind you that no juror is ever required by law to impose a death sentence. When you're in the jury room, please discuss all aspects of these sentencing issues among yourselves with candor and frankness, but also with a due regard and respect for the opinions of one another. This has been a long case, and you have spent a lot of time together as jurors. Regardless of any personal regard you may have for each other, you must each decide this case for yourself. No juror should surrender his or her own conclusion merely because other jurors might feel otherwise, or simply to get to a unanimous decision. Remember that the parties and the court are relying on you to give full, considered, and mature consideration to the question of sentencing. By doing so, you carry out to the fullest your oath as jurors that you will well and truly try the issues of this case and render a just verdict. As with the prior phase, if it becomes necessary during your deliberations to communicate with me for any reason, simply send a note signed by the foreman of the jury. If you send a note, do not indicate any decision-making on any of the issues that are before you or provide any details about your progress. And additionally, do not attempt to communicate with the court or any other court personnel except the court security officer by telling him that you have the need for him to convey it other than in writing a signed writing. There will be no oral communications. Any questions you have, you should present in writing. When you have reached a decision, send me a note signed by the foreman that you have reached a decision. Do not indicate on the note what the decision is. And in no communication with the court prior to a verdict should you ever give a numerical count of where the jury stands in its deliberations on any issue. Whichever decision you reach, the foreman must also sign and fill out the verdict form accordingly according to the verdict, and be prepared to report to the court your findings as to the issues in the verdict form, the defendant's age, the gateway, aggravating and mitigating factors, and your sentencing decision. As we did in the prior phase, you will have an envelope in the room that at the end of the day each day, as you deliberate, you will put the verdict slip inside the envelope and seal it, and it will remain sealed and be returned to you in a sealed condition the following day, and you will remove it from the envelope yourselves. I note for the record that you will not have your cell phones, PDAs, or other electronic devices during the deliberations. I understand they have already been collected from you and will not be returned to you until the court recesses each day. Of course, as I previously said, it would be improper and a violation of your oath as a juror to conduct any outside research or investigations on the internet or otherwise to communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, outside the deliberations conducted by the jury as a whole in the jury room. As in the first phase, only 12 jurors will be deliberating. The alternates remain important because you may be called to serve in the event that a deliberating juror is no longer able to participate in the deliberations. But as before, the alternate jurors will be separated from the deliberating jurors during the deliberations. And among the alternate jurors, you're not to discuss anything about the case or the penalty among each other. In other words, you're not to act as if you were also a deliberating jury. When the court is in session, you will return to the courtroom as well so that you may hear any responses to jury questions and any other remarks that are necessary from me. Let me conclude by reminding you again that nothing I have said in my instructions and nothing I've done or said during the course of the trial has been said or done to suggest to you that what I think the outcome should be. What the sentencing decision should be is your exclusive duty and responsibility. Let me see counsel again at the side, please. All right. We should have our fingers warmed up after that. Let's try now this this closing argument. Ready? Here we go. As you can see from the list of mitigating factors in this case, the bulk of the mitigation case comes down to a single proposition. His brother made him do it. There are other mitigating factors, of course, related to his family and his upbringing, but as Ms. Clark's argument just made clear to you, they are there largely to explain to you how his brother made him do it. The defense may phrase it in different ways, but that's the basic idea, and that's the idea they've been trying to sell you on since day one in this case. That was the defense in the guilt phase, and now it's the heart of the mitigation case. No matter how many times they say that the defendant takes responsibility for his actions, they actually keep trying to pin the blame on his older brother. Our response is just as easily stated. It's not true. His brother did not make him do it, and in any event, it doesn't matter what his brother did. He's the one on trial, not his brother. You need to sentence him for his actions. When you consider the mitigation case, keep in mind that the defense bears the burden of proof. They have to convince you that these things are true. An argument isn't evidence. Things aren't true just because Ms. Clark says they are. There has to be evidence that proves them to be true. It's up to you to decide whether that evidence exists, and if it does, whether it's enough to convince you. Also, keep in mind that even if a mitigating factor is proved, that doesn't mean you have to give it any weight. It's easy to phrase mitigating factors in a way that can be proved. Take the very first one on their list. The defendant was 19 years old when he committed these offenses. That's pretty easy to prove, but it's entirely up to you to decide if it makes a difference in this case. Some 19-year-olds act like they're 14. Some 14-year-olds can be more mature than adults. Their own expert told you that. It's entirely up to you to decide whether the defendant deserves credit for his age or for any other mitigating factor. Now, I agree with Ms. Clark that the weighing of aggravating and mitigating factors is not a numbers game. You can't just total them both up and compare. You have to decide how weighty each one is. For example, you might decide that a particular aggravating factor, say that Martin Richard was especially vulnerable to the effects of a shrapnel bomb because he was a little boy, is more important than a mitigating factor, say that the defendant's teachers had a high opinion of him when he was in elementary school. You may even decide that a few aggravating factors, say that the defendant committed multiple murders in a heinous, cruel, and depraved manner during an act of terrorism, outweigh all of the mitigating factors combined. That's entirely up to you. You heard an awful lot about Tam Sarnev during the mitigation case, and you heard Ms. Clark refer to Tam Sarnev or to the older brother well over 100 times just now. You also heard a lot about Chechnya. What did all that really tell you? At times it might have seemed to you as if Tam Sarnev were the only one on trial, or the Chechens. But since it's the defendant who's on trial, consider for a minute what all that evidence told you about the defendant. He was born in Central Asia, not the mountains of Chechnya. He was born in the same area where his father and all of his paternal aunts and uncles had been born. He spent his early years with a warm, extended family that includes his parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, a brother, and 2 sisters. They loved him, supported him, and doted on him. He lived either in Central Asia in Dagestan with his mother's family, or with his cousins in a house near the Caspian Sea. He has never set foot in Chechnya in his life. When he was 8, he moved with his parents from one of the poorest parts of the world to the wealthiest. They were looking for a better life, and they found it. They got an apartment in Cambridge that was walking distance to Harvard Square. Anyone who knows Cambridge knows how a desirable place it is to live. The apartment was snug, but it was adequate. It had a bedroom for the parents, a separate bedroom for the girls, another bedroom for the boys, a kitchen, and a living room with a TV. Anzer and Zubaydah were not well off, but they provided what kids need to thrive. The defendant and his siblings had food, clothing, school supplies, and a warm home to share, and they also had a lot of the extras American kids have come to take for granted in their lives: cars, television, computers, iPods, cell phone. The children had medical care and a free public education at excellent schools. They may not have been well off, but they were rich in many things that a lot of kids lack. Let's talk a minute about school, because quite a number of the defense witnesses were people who knew the defendant through school. What did you learn from those witnesses? One thing you learned is that the defendant was extremely lucky when it came to school. He had devoted teachers who got to know him, appreciated him, and helped him succeed. He had dedicated coaches and mentors who promoted him. He was well liked. In short, everything you heard tells you that the defendant had everything he needed to grow into a strong, independent, mature, resilient adult. And the evidence shows that is just what happened. Several of his teachers, coaches, and mentors noted that he was unusually mature. He was the only boy in elementary school who held the baby. He learned English so quickly he skipped 4th grade. His high school friends made him captain of the wrestling team. His friend told you that he was not easily pushed around. He liked to say yes, but he knew how to say no. He was not a follower. He was able to make up his own mind. He knew his own mind. He understood the difference between right and wrong. Tam, you heard, grew up in the same large family as the defendant. He was also loved, supported, and doted on. He had the same advantages the defendant had when he came to the United States to live in Cambridge, and he also had a lot of strengths and successes. He wasn't as good in school as the defendant, but he was a skilled boxer. The defendant's brother-in-law, who testified via video link, told you that Tam was handsome and could be charming, I'll bet it in a goofy kind of way. Of course, Tam and the defendant had very different personalities. Tam was loud, flashy, in your face. The defendant was quiet, polite, and laid back. Tam couldn't stop talking about his beliefs. The defendant kept his beliefs to himself. Tam sometimes lost his temper. The defendant knew how to keep his cool. But despite their differences, they were from the same stock. They grew up in the same family, in the same household, and in many ways they were very much alike. They were both physically strong, one a boxer, one a wrestler, capable of defeating much larger opponents. They were both emotionally strong. They took care of themselves and didn't need anyone's shoulder to cry on. And they were both men of action. When it was time to make a bomb, Tam shopped for pressure cookers and got on the internet and ordered the parts he needed. When the defendant described that he needed a gun, he got one from his friend Stephen Silva by telling him he planned to rob some drug dealers in Providence. Stephen Silva was surprised by that. He didn't bat an eye. Despite what Ms. Clark just told you, there's no evidence that Tam told the defendant to get a gun. None. That's just something the defense wants you to believe. Tam didn't search for P95 Ruger on the internet until well after the defendant got the gun. Don't be misled by that argument. Of course, you know the defendant's strength or will, his presence of mind in many other ways. You know that even after his brother had been captured by police, he had the grit to get back into that SUV, make a 3-point turn, and try to run over 3 police officers, even if it meant driving through a hail of bullets and running over his own brother. How many people do you know who could pull off something like that? And after ditching the Mercedes while whole police forces were searching for the defendant, he managed to pick his way through Waterton, blood dripping from his gunshot wounds, find a hiding place, smash his cell phones, and pen a very coherent and powerful message on the inside of a boat while nearly evading capture altogether. That's the kind of person he is, strong and strong-willed, just like his brother. When you think back over all the evidence you heard during the mitigation phase, ask yourself this: did you hear any evidence that convinces you that Tam Sarnev actually made Dzhokhar Sarnev commit these crimes? Not made him in the sense of put a gun to his head, even the defense doesn't claim that, but made him in the sense that the defendant was coerced or controlled, made him in the sense that he was so vulnerable to Tam's influence and so influenced by Tam that he should be excused from bearing moral responsibility for what he did. All right, let's take a break from that closing argument. Try some literary practice. This is an article we had started called Captioners Say I Love My Job. Ready? Here we go. I wish it all flowed perfectly 100% of the time, but that's not realistic. When I first started, I would make a mistake and go into deer in the headlights mode. Now I don't panic. I just make quick decisions of what to do. Asterisk back, dash and correct, let it go and move on, paraphrase, etc. And there are some briefs I don't want to be able to easily misstroke when they could produce some offensive or highly embarrassing mistakes, so I always try to make briefs that are easy to remember and write but will not be likely to easily misstroke. If it is a bad day, I try to remember to relax and breathe. This is such a high-stress, high-pressure job sometimes, but you have to be relaxed to do it. If I'm having a bad day writing, I remember to have confidence and work on feeling confident in myself and my abilities. Steno can be a big head game for me. Confidence and believing in yourself are essentials. I agree with everything that everyone has said. I had covered an on-site card event in Trenton, New Jersey, and Governor Christie was a guest speaker. During the introduction of the governor, I heard some giggles behind me, and I had a strong feeling those giggles were directed at my captions. I looked up at the screen. The speaker had said Governor Christie is a politician, but it came up Governor Christie is a police station. It was too late for me to do anything. It was out there and was already finished with this following sentence. Even that Josh said is true. Reading what you write as you write it is so important. Having confidence in yourself, trying to relax, the list goes on. And Tammy mentioned not dwelling on your mistakes, which is hard for me. I used to panic when I'd see mistakes show up. Now I try to always look at my screen so that I can try to catch them before it's too late. And to boost my confidence, I prepare for every job I do, no matter how small the job. If I'm not provided any prep when a new job is assigned to me, it only takes a few minutes to go online and search for whatever the topic may be to at least get some information about it. Also, I do research as the job is going on. When I'm working remotely from home, I have a second laptop set up directly adjacent to the one I'm using for captioning so that I can do on-the-spot last-minute research. If anything keeps coming up that I'm unsure of how to spell, if and or when I have time, I move my fingers over to the spare computer and start typing how I think something is spelled. 9 times out of 10, the correct spelling will pop up before I'm halfway through typing what I think the word or name is. This is especially useful when I'm covering college classes. One time when I was captioning at an on-site meeting, someone's service dog started licking my leg. The dog was under the table, so no one else noticed. Luckily, I was able to keep writing without dropping, and the dog eventually stopped, but it was hard not to laugh. I want to encourage anyone interested in captioning to reach out to the captioning community, join the Captioners NCRA Facebook discussion group, and ask questions. Whether you're brand new to captioning or been at it for years, there's always more to learn, and we'd love to help. All right, we will stop there. That will conclude our literary and jury charge practice.